Hi guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most paradoxical abilities imaginable. What if you could remember the future? Not predict it or see visions, but actually remember events that haven't happened yet with the same clarity as yesterday's memories. How would this fundamentally alter your experience of life, free will, and reality itself? If you enjoy these time-bending sleep stories that explore the nature of memory and causality, hit that like button and subscribe for more, and drop a comment letting me know what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. I always appreciate connecting with night owls across time zones. Alright, let's begin. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning with the absolute certainty that in 3 days, at precisely 2:27 in the afternoon, you will witness a blue sedan colliding with a delivery truck at the intersection of 5th Avenue and Pine Street in downtown Seattle. You can see it with perfect clarity. The sedan's license plate reads Charlie Delta 7942. The delivery driver will be wearing a red baseball cap, and the impact will send the sedan spinning counterclockwise exactly 135 degrees before coming to rest against a fire hydrant painted yellow with rust stains near its base. This isn't a dream, a vision, or a guess. This is memory, as vivid and undeniable as your recollection of yesterday's breakfast, except it hasn't happened yet. This extraordinary scenario forces us to confront one of the most fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and the nature of time itself. We live our lives moving forward through what physicists call the arrow of time, accumulating memories of past events while remaining blind to future ones. But what if this limitation isn't as absolute as we believe? What if the human brain, under certain circumstances or evolutionary pressures, could develop the capacity to remember events that lie ahead in the timeline rather than behind it? The implications of such an ability would reshape every aspect of human civilization, from the most intimate personal relationships to the largest global institutions. Consider the immediate practical consequences. If you possessed perfect foreknowledge of stock market movements, you could predict that Apple shares will drop by 4.7% next Tuesday morning following an unexpected manufacturing delay announcement, or that a relatively unknown cryptocurrency called Quantum Coin will surge by 2,300% over the next 6 months due to a breakthrough in quantum computing applications. The global financial system, built on uncertainty and risk assessment, would face unprecedented challenges as traditional economic models became obsolete overnight. But the ramifications extend far beyond personal enrichment. Emergency response systems would undergo revolutionary transformation when rescue workers could remember exactly where survivors will be located beneath the rubble of buildings that haven't yet collapsed. The Federal Emergency Management Agency currently maintains disaster response teams across 56 field offices nationwide, coordinating resources worth approximately $14.3 billion annually. If these teams could access memories of future disasters with the same clarity as past ones, they could pre-position equipment and personnel with surgical precision. Imagine fire departments in California remembering the exact moment when a wildfire will jump Highway 1 near Big Sur, allowing them to position their Type 1 fire engines and 20-person hotshot crews at precisely the right coordinates hours before the flames arrive. The transformation of medicine would be equally profound. Oncologists could remember the specific genetic mutations that will develop in a patient's tumor cells over the next 18 months, allowing them to prescribe targeted therapies before the cancer adapts its survival mechanisms. A cardiologist at Johns Hopkins might recall performing emergency surgery on a patient whose massive heart attack won't occur until next Thursday, enabling preventive intervention that could save the 37,000 Americans who die annually from sudden cardiac events. The entire pharmaceutical industry, which invests approximately $200 billion yearly in drug development, would shift from reactive treatment models to predictive prevention strategies based on remembered future health outcomes. Yet this remarkable ability would create ethical dilemmas that humanity has never faced. If you remember your neighbour's child being struck by a car next Wednesday at 4:15 in the afternoon while chasing a red balloon into Maple Street, do you have a moral obligation to intervene? The utilitarian calculus seems obvious, but the deeper implications are staggering. Every prevented tragedy would create ripple effects throughout the timeline, potentially altering countless other remembered futures in unpredictable ways. The child you save might grow up to become a brilliant surgeon who saves thousands of lives, or perhaps their survival inadvertently prevents them from meeting their future spouse, erasing entire family lines from existence. These temporal paradoxes would challenge our most basic concepts of free will and personal responsibility. If you remember committing a crime next month, are you already guilty? Can you be prosecuted for a murder that exists only in your future memories? Legal systems worldwide would face unprecedented questions about causality and accountability. The United States justice system, which processes approximately 20 million criminal cases annually at a cost of $270 billion, would require complete restructuring to address crimes that exist in memory but not yet in reality. Religious and philosophical frameworks would similarly face profound disruption. Christianity's concept of divine omniscience suddenly becomes a human trait, while Buddhism's emphasis on living in the present moment takes on new complexity when the future exists as vividly as memory. The Vatican, which influences the spiritual lives of approximately 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, would need to reconcile traditional teachings about prophecy and divine revelation with ordinary humans possessing perfect knowledge of future events. Would remembering the future constitute a form of secular prophecy, or would it represent a fundamental evolutionary leap in human consciousness? The scientific establishment would scramble to understand the neurological mechanisms underlying future memory. Current neuroscience research indicates that human memory formation involves approximately 86 billion neurons creating trillions of synaptic connections, with new memories encoded through changes in protein synthesis and synaptic strength. If the brain could somehow access future events, it would suggest either that information can flow backward through time at the quantum level, or that consciousness operates according to principles that transcend our current understanding of causality. Leading theoretical physicists would find themselves grappling with models that challenge Einstein's relativity theory, which permits information to travel faster than light under certain exotic conditions involving closed time-like curves. The European Organization for Nuclear Research, operating the Large Hadron Collider at energies up to 14 trillion electron volts, might discover that consciousness interacts with quantum fields in ways that allow neural networks to access future quantum states. Such findings would revolutionize our understanding of the relationship between mind and matter, potentially validating theories about quantum consciousness that mainstream science has long dismissed. This psychological impact on individuals possessing future memories would be immense. Imagine the burden of remembering every loss, betrayal, and tragedy that awaits you and your loved ones. You would recall with perfect clarity the phone call informing you of your parents' death 15 months from now, the moment your marriage ends in divorce after 7 years and 4 months, or the devastating diagnosis that will change everything on a cold Tuesday morning in February. This knowledge would either paralyze individuals with despair or drive them to desperate attempts to alter predetermined futures, creating tremendous psychological stress and potential mental health crises. Mental health professionals, already treating approximately 57 million Americans annually for various psychiatric conditions, would face an entirely new category of disorders related to future memory trauma. How do you counsel someone suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder caused by events that haven't yet occurred. Traditional therapeutic approaches based on processing past experiences would prove inadequate for treating anticipatory grief and future shock syndrome. The global intelligence community would undergo fundamental transformation as traditional espionage becomes obsolete. The Central Intelligence Agency, operating with an annual budget of approximately $15 billion across 117 countries, would find conventional surveillance methods superseded by operatives who simply remember future conversations, meetings, and decisions. International relations would destabilize as nations possessing future memory capabilities could anticipate military movements, diplomatic strategies, and economic policies with perfect accuracy. Consider the geopolitical implications when intelligence analysts remember that North Korea will test a hydrogen bomb with a yield of 200 kilotons next autumn, or that a coup attempt will occur in a strategically important allied nation during the third week of June. The current global defense spending of approximately $2.1 trillion annually would shift dramatically toward countermeasures against enemies who possess perfect foreknowledge of military plans and operations. Economic markets would experience unprecedented volatility as the fundamental principle of efficient market hypothesis crumbles under the weight of perfect information about future events. The New York Stock Exchange, which processes approximately 1.5 billion shares worth over $60 billion in daily trading volume, would face chaos as traditional price discovery mechanisms break down. If even a small percentage of traders possessed future memories, they could remember that crude oil prices will spike to $137 per barrel following a pipeline explosion in Texas, or that Tesla's stock will plummet by 38% after an autonomous vehicle accident involving 17 fatalities. The commodities markets would similarly face disruption as agricultural futures traders remember exact crop yields affected by droughts, floods, and pest infestations that won't occur for months. The Chicago Board of Trade, which handles contracts worth over $2 trillion annually in agricultural commodities, would struggle to maintain orderly markets when participants possess perfect knowledge of future weather patterns and harvest outcomes. Insurance companies, built on actuarial tables calculating risk probabilities across millions of policies, would face existential threats. State Farm, the largest property casualty insurer in the United States with approximately 83 million policies and revenues of $81 billion, would find their business model obsolete if even a fraction of their customers could remember future accidents, natural disasters, and property damage. How do you calculate premiums when policyholders possess perfect knowledge of future claims? The transportation industry would transform as airlines, shipping companies, and logistics networks adapt to perfect knowledge of future demand and supply disruptions. Delta Airlines, operating over 4,000 flights daily across 325 destinations, could optimize routes and scheduling with unprecedented precision if they could remember future passenger loads, weather delays, and mechanical issues. However, this same knowledge would eliminate the uncertainty that allows airlines to overbook flights and manage capacity, fundamentally altering their revenue models. Educational systems worldwide would require complete restructuring as traditional learning models become obsolete. Why memorize historical facts or mathematical formulas when you can remember using that knowledge in future situations? The United States spends approximately $750 billion annually on education across 130,000 schools, serving 50 million students. This entire system would need reimagining if students could remember their future careers, life experiences, and knowledge applications. Universities conducting research worth approximately $75 billion annually would face the paradox of investigating questions whose answers they already remember discovering. the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Stanford University and other leading research institutions would struggle to maintain their traditional roles when breakthrough discoveries exist as future memories rather than unknown frontiers requiring investigation. The entertainment industry would undergo profound changes as audiences could remember experiencing movies, books, and television shows before they're produced. Hollywood, generating approximately $100 billion annually across studios, theaters, and streaming platforms, would need to create entirely new forms of entertainment that remain engaging even when outcomes are known in advance. Perhaps interactive experiences would replace passive consumption, or artists would focus on the journey rather than destination storytelling. Sports would face similar challenges as fans remember the outcomes of games, seasons, and championships before they occur. The National Football League, generating approximately $18 billion in annual revenue across 32 teams, would see betting markets collapse as outcomes become predetermined knowledge rather than uncertain contests. Would people still watch games if they remembered every play, penalty, and final score? The psychological thrill of uncertainty that drives sports fandom would require redefinition. Personal relationships would become incredibly complex when individuals remember future conversations, arguments, infidelities, and breakups. Dating applications like Tinder and Bumble, facilitating millions of connections daily, would become obsolete as people remember meeting their future spouses through specific circumstances rather than random encounters. The divorce rate, currently affecting approximately 40 to 50% of marriages in the United States, might decrease as couples could remember working through future challenges, or increase as they recall inevitable incompatibilities. Child-rearing would present unprecedented challenges when parents remember their children's future struggles, achievements, and life paths. Would you intervene if you remembered your daughter developing a drug addiction at age 16? Or would such intervention alter the timeline in unpredictable ways? The Department of Health and Human Services, spending approximately $130 billion annually on child welfare programs, would need new frameworks for addressing problems that exist in memory but not yet in reality. The criminal justice system would face fundamental questions about preemptive action versus reactive response. If you remember witnessing a murder next month, do police have probable cause to arrest the future perpetrator? The FBI, investigating approximately 14,000 homicides annually, would need to develop protocols for crimes that exist only as future memories. Defense attorneys would argue that thoughts, even future memories, cannot constitute evidence of intent or guilt. International law would struggle with crimes against humanity that haven't yet occurred. If someone remembers a genocide beginning in 18 months, does the international community have a responsibility to intervene preemptively? The United Nations, operating with a budget of approximately $3 billion across 193 member states, would face unprecedented challenges in maintaining global peace and security when some nations possess perfect knowledge of future conflicts while others remain ignorant. Environmental conservation efforts would be revolutionized by perfect knowledge of future ecological changes. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, monitoring climate system with satellites, weather stations, and ocean buoys generating terabytes of data daily, would find their predictive models superseded by direct memories of future weather patterns, temperature changes, and natural disasters. Climate scientists could remember the exact moment when the West Antarctic ice sheet begins its irreversible collapse, or when atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations reach the tipping point of 450 parts per million. Conservation organizations like the World Wildlife Fund, protecting endangered species across 100 countries, with annual conservation spending of approximately $250 million, would know exactly which species will face extinction and when. They would remember the last wild tigers disappearing from Myanmar's forests in 7 years and 3 months, or the final population of vaquita porpoises dying in the Gulf of California next decade. Such knowledge would enable targeted conservation efforts, but might also create despair if some extinctions prove inevitable, despite intervention attempts. Agricultural systems worldwide would transform as farmers remember exact weather patterns, pest outbreaks, and crop yields for seasons extending years into the future. The United States agricultural sector, producing crops worth approximately $170 billion annually across 905 million acres, would optimize planting decisions, irrigation systems, and harvest timing with unprecedented precision. Farmers would remember that corn prices will peak at $7.63 per bushel on August 15th, due to drought conditions affecting Indiana, Iowa, and Illinois, allowing them to adjust planting strategies accordingly. Medical research would accelerate dramatically as scientists remember the outcomes of clinical trials, drug interactions, and treatment protocols before beginning expensive and time-consuming studies. The National Institutes of Health, funding medical research worth approximately $42 billion annually across universities and research institutions, would redirect resources based on memories of successful therapeutic approaches. Researchers would remember discovering that a specific combination of immunotherapy drugs will cure pancreatic cancer in 67% of patients, allowing them to fast-track development and save the 47,000 Americans who die from this disease each year. The pharmaceutical industry would face disruption as drug development timelines compress from decades to months based on remembered outcomes. Companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Roche, investing hundreds of billions of dollars in research and development, would pivot toward manufacturing treatments they remember proving effective rather than conducting lengthy clinical trials. However, this would raise ethical questions about bypassing safety protocols even when future outcomes are known with certainty. International trade would become incredibly complex when some nations possess perfect knowledge of future commodity prices, currency fluctuations, and supply chain disruptions. The World Trade Organization, overseeing trade relationships worth approximately $19 trillion annually between 164 member countries, would struggle to maintain fair competition when certain participants remember future market conditions. Trade negotiations would become exercises in managing information asymmetry rather than economic forecasting. Space exploration would accelerate as agencies remember discovering extraterrestrial life, finding habitable planets, or encountering technological artifacts from advanced civilizations. NASA, operating with an annual budget of approximately $25 billion across 10 field centers and multiple international partnerships, would redirect missions based on memories of successful discoveries. Astronauts would remember finding microbial life in the subsurface oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa during a mission scheduled for 12 years from now, allowing mission planners to optimize spacecraft design and scientific instruments. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence would take on new urgency if radio telescopes operators remembered receiving artificial signals from star systems dozens of light years away. The SETI Institute, scanning the cosmos with radio telescopes and spending approximately $2 million annually on research, would know exactly when and from which stellar coordinates the first confirmed alien communication will arrive. This knowledge would revolutionize humanity's understanding of our place in the universe while raising profound questions about first contact protocols. Technological development would accelerate exponentially as engineers remember breakthrough innovations before conducting research and development. Silicon Valley companies spending over $100 billion annually on research and development would pivot toward technologies they remember creating successfully. Engineers at Intel would remember developing quantum processors capable of 1 million qubit operations, while researchers at Google would recall achieving artificial general intelligence through neural networks inspired by octopus brain architecture. The artificial intelligence industry would face unique paradoxes as developers remember creating systems that surpass human intelligence in all domains. Companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind would know exactly which architectural approaches lead to artificial general intelligence and which result in dangerous alignment failures. They would remember the specific moment when an AI system achieves recursive self-improvement, triggering an intelligence explosion that transforms civilization within 96 hours. Privacy and surveillance would take on new dimensions as governments remember citizens' future actions, communications, and associations. The National Security Agency, processing communications data from fiber optic cables, satellite intercepts, and internet traffic monitoring, would possess perfect knowledge of future terrorist plots, cyber attacks, and foreign intelligence operations. However, this capability would raise unprecedented questions about civil liberties and the presumption of innocence when authorities remember crimes before they occur. Social media platforms would transform as users remember future posts, viral content, and platform changes before they happen. Facebook's parent company Meta, serving approximately 3 billion users worldwide and generating over $100 billion in annual revenue, would need to adapt to users who remember exactly which content will engage audiences and which posts will trigger algorithmic suppression or account suspensions. The concept of privacy would fundamentally change when individuals remember observing private moments in other people's futures. Traditional expectations about personal boundaries would require redefinition, as the distinction between public and private information blurs across temporal dimensions. Legal frameworks protecting privacy, built on assumptions about information accessibility and temporal limitations, would need complete reconstruction. Religious institutions would face theological crises as ordinary humans demonstrate capabilities traditionally attributed to divine omniscience. The Catholic Church, serving 1.3 billion adherents worldwide with assets estimated at $15 billion, would need to reconcile dogma about prophetic gifts being exclusive to saints and chosen messengers with widespread human capacity for future memory. Protestant denominations, Islamic communities, and Eastern religions would similarly grapple with the implications of temporal omniscience becoming a natural human ability. Archaeological discoveries would accelerate as researchers remember uncovering specific artifacts at precise coordinates before beginning excavations. Teams would remember finding intact Egyptian tombs in the Valley of the Kings containing papyrus scrolls that revolutionize understanding of ancient mathematics, or discovering Mayan cities in Guatemala that reveal previously unknown astronomical knowledge. The field of archaeology, operating with limited funding from universities and governments, would redirect resources toward guaranteed discoveries rather than speculative excavations. The art world would undergo profound transformation as collectors remember which contemporary works will appreciate in value over decades. Auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's, facilitating art sales worth approximately $13 billion annually, would face market distortions as bidders possess perfect knowledge of future valuations. Unknown artists would suddenly command high prices based on memories of their future recognition and critical acclaim. Literary and artistic creation would face existential questions about originality and inspiration when creators remember producing specific works in future years. Authors would struggle with whether to write books they remember publishing, while painters would question creating canvases they recall completing decades hence. The creative process would become a complex negotiation between remembered future accomplishments and present moment inspiration. Historical scholarship would advance rapidly as researchers remember discovering documents, artifacts, and evidence that resolve long-standing mysteries. Historians would recall finding Benjamin Franklin's lost correspondence revealing previously unknown diplomatic negotiations, or uncovering archaeological evidence that definitively locates Cleopatra's tomb beneath Alexandria's modern waterfront. The field of history, traditionally focused on reconstructing past events from fragmentary evidence, would transform into verification of remembered future discoveries. The publishing industry would adapt to authors who remember exactly which books will become bestsellers and which literary themes will resonate with future audiences. Major publishing houses like Penguin Random House and HarperCollins, generating combined revenues of approximately $15 billion annually, would shift from editorial intuition toward data-driven publishing based on remembered market responses. Emergency medical services would revolutionize trauma care as paramedics remember exactly which accident victims will require specific interventions. Emergency medical services across the United States, responding to approximately 37 million calls annually, with over 1 million certified paramedics and emergency medical technicians, would pre-position specialized equipment and coordinate hospital resources based on perfect knowledge of future medical emergencies. The implications of remembering the future would ultimately force humanity to confront fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, free will, and temporal existence. Are we living in a deterministic universe where future events already exist in some higher dimensional space, accessible to properly configured neural networks? Or does the ability to remember future events create a dynamic feedback loop, where knowledge of tomorrow actively shapes the timeline itself? Perhaps most profoundly, this capability would reveal whether human consciousness represents a unique phenomenon in the universe, or simply one expression of a broader principle connecting mind and matter across temporal boundaries. The ramifications would extend far beyond practical applications, fundamentally altering humanity's understanding of existence, purpose, and our relationship with the cosmic order that governs reality itself. As we contemplate this extraordinary possibility, we must consider whether remembering the future would represent humanity's greatest achievement or its ultimate curse, bringing unprecedented power at the cost of mystery, uncertainty, and the beautiful unpredictability that makes life worth living.